Hey, everybody, it's another good day of recovery, one day at a time. Today, we're going to talk about internal boundaries. And I'm using this word precisely here, when we're made to feel like the bad guy. And I'm not saying that what the other person's doing is intentional. Sometimes it might be, sometimes not. But what is going on when that happens? Um, I'll talk about it clinically and then use an example. So what's happening is a person has their own stuff, their own shame, their own guilt, and they don't want to deal with it. So they dump it on someone else. They put it onto that other person as if they're doing it consciously or unconsciously. Words that are psychobabble are things like projection. We project onto that other person what our stuff is. Okay. So if someone I feel is like, I'm not really honest, or I don't want to be, I don't have a secret, I don't want to share that, I might accuse the other person of not being honest with me and not being open. If I'm feeling defensive, I might actually turn it around and make it as though they're the defensive one. I see this a lot with sex addiction, actually. It's the most interesting thing where sometimes someone comes in and they feel like their spouse is not being faithful. And so we talk a little bit around it. And then I ask, well, have you ever struggled with this, this, and this? And they kind of go, well, yeah. And then it's like, wow, and I'm not divulging anything too personal, but what happens is the person actually struggles more than the person they're accusing. And then as a therapist, I have to be very gentle to try to work around that to help that come to a place where we each can own our own stuff. Okay. So, what is it like being on the receiving end of this? On the receiving end, we're kind of confused. We may feel attacked. We may feel defensive ourselves, like something's going on where did this come from? They're saying I did this, this, and this, and that. And I just feel like someone stepped into my internal boundary space, telling me what my intentions were. And so they might use phrases like, well, what you were trying to do is do this and this and this. At that moment, that's where a boundary crossing is, where they're stepping into my personhood and assume it's not even assuming, there's kind of a boldness that they know what my intention was. Or if someone says, I know what you were thinking. Okay, again, they're stepping into my boundary space. And you can feel that if you're good at feeling things. With addiction, you might not feel it, but they're climbing into this space that's like, I feel like going, hey, I need space here. Um, Now, if I'm telling them this is my thinking about whether we should buy this car or not, and if they say, I think you're thinking we should buy the car because it's green and you like the color green, that's a different story. But what I'm talking about is where they assume so much and they're trying to tell me what I'm thinking about this. They may say, well, I know you're trying to buy this car because you want it for yourself and you're trying to get it as a tax write-off and you're trying to do this and this, and it's like that just feels sticky and manipulative. Say like they had thoughts that that's what I might be trying to do. This is where it moves it away from a boundary crossing to something much more boundary respectful. They may say, I'm curious. The best boundaries would be, I'm curious, why do you want the green car? And then you basically take notes. Just listen to what they have to say. Don't make judgments. Don't make internal. Just, well, I want the green car because it's green and I like the color green. It will be a good tax write off. By the way, this isn't meant to be tax advice. I don't really write off cars, but, and it's going to have good economy. Asking questions, rarely is there a boundary crossing with that, but telling people what they think and what they do, that's usually problematic. Some questions are so personal that we don't ask those questions, and that would be a boundary crossing. But most questions, like consent, would you like to go to pizza tonight? Yeah, that sounds good. If I use phrases like, we need to go to pizza, and I know you want to go to pizza, so let's go to the pizza place. Yeah, that would be crossing of boundaries because it assumes no separation from the other person and myself. Um, so boundaries. To reiterate what boundaries are is that it's this sense of where Erik is, and we could signify, and you'll see me draw this on a whiteboard, where this kind of like an inverted bell-shaped plexiglass or membrane or glass where you can see through it, you can experience life around you, you can feel some of other people's feelings and get a sense, but it's protective in the sense that it has the sense of this is where Erik is, and we'll say that other person is. I'll make up a name like Mark. So if I'm feeling Mark's feelings for him, that's not enough boundary space. If I feel my own feelings about what Mark is going through, that's okay. Now, say like Mark feels ashamed because he did something wrong in our relationship. And let's say, like, and this is all conjecture, and there is no Mark that I'm upset with, but Mark doesn't want to own it. And he wants to make it all my fault. Well, it's very sophisticated and it's very convoluted. In fact, I would just call it a mystery. It's something so deep and profound that just happens, and it feels yucky. But say like Mark, um, I should have thought of something before. A good example. Say like Mark and I are going to go buy this car together, and he has reservations about buying it. And one could say that if we're friends and we're buying a car to share, that's kind of a, a little red flag number one, that there's a boundary issue. But say like we're going to do this, that we have plenty of money, and say like we can share it and have a business proposition where we're going to rent it out, you know. And say like he doesn't want to share with me honestly about his feelings, his his reservation about doing this. And so then he shows up to the place late, and he then doesn't get his paperwork done. And so I could do two things. I could start mind reading and guessing maybe he doesn't want to do this. I could start to try to control him to try to get him there on time and try to get his paperwork by saying, "Hey, are you going to get your paperwork ready?" you know, and that could be a boundary crossing or not. If I'm owning my needs on this side of the relationship, that's fine. But if I feel like I need to step into his place and try to act as his conscience for him and to try to get him activated, that would be problematic. It's kind of like a teeter totter where I'm doing most of the work and he's kind of backpedaling. Okay. So to speed up this hypothetical example, so say like it all hits the fan and he tells me that I was controlling, that I was pushing for this car deal, and that he never wanted to do any of it to begin with, and that I pressured him into it. By the way, all that could be in terms of this scenario, but say like I have really good boundaries and I didn't do any of that. And he just feels bad that he was not honest with me. And so he might say things, "You were never honest with me to begin with." It's like, this is where it feels crazy making. Like, Actually, I was every step of the way, I asked, "Do you wanna do this? Do you wanna do this? Is this something you wanna do?" Um, when it came to the paperwork, and this sounds defensive, but the paperwork, I was only bringing it up just so that we would have a successful meeting with the car place to sell it. Um, but it's come to be that now it's all my fault. And he doesn't want to take any ownership of it. And that's where dysfunction is sometimes is when people just don't want to be open about their own stuff. And this, by the way, this is a scenario that's very benign. It's very simple. It's not a lot of shame involved, I think. Um, but the this all or nothingness that he has no part in this is all me is probably a problem. If I maintain good boundaries, that I was mindful and prayerful every step of the way, I might just try to stay solid. But I might, and depending on my internal boundary and my cell membrane, that kind of lets me be me. I have more choice. Say, like if I'm healthier, to what I could call stiff arm, or to turn up the force shield to extra strength where it's thicker, to be able to not let him shame me for his behavior, and to be gentle, to not retaliate or to be angry, but just to, and usually silence is golden in this situation. And he may spout off these things about me. I never wanted to do this anyway, and you're so controlling and all this. If I respond with, well, you're not honest, and you're um, should have been more honest, and you tend to be late anyway, and you're probably not good with paperwork anyway. See, that's where I'm joining in this dysfunction, tossing things back and forth. And do I really need to do that? I don't. In this case, I don't know if I need to do that. I, I believe in God, and I think that God could probably enlighten him better than me needing to be the enlightened one to enlighten him. When we're in these relationships, there's a book called PM Melodies, Facing Codependence. In fact, I don't know if I have it here. It's a really good book. I'll probably be doing a workshop on something like this. It's just been a lifesaver for 30 years. And she says a couple of things. One is that there's this phrase you can use: this is more about you than about me, unless I've done something genuinely offensive. Yeah, this is more about you than about me, unless I've done genuinely offensive. If I have thin boundaries, and I have kind of broken boundaries or broken fences, I feel guilty for his problem. And this can push buttons in me to where my parents might have um, always blamed me for things. I might have been the scapegoat. I might have felt too responsible as a small child for their anger and their behavior. And small children just naturally feel responsible because their boundaries are thin. There's a phrase, thick skinned and thin skinned. It kind of relates to this because it has to do with emotion. And when we have that thicker skin and that thicker separateness, it's like we seem less affected by it and less reactive. If we have been wounded, we feel more responsible for the behavior. So I like the simple exercise to ask myself, well, what did I do if genuinely offensive? And really get good at that. I think it's always wise for us, anybody, to look at, well, what could I have done better? That question comes from the AA Big Book, by the way. It's a powerful question. What could I have done better? I could have been more patient or gentle. I still don't have to take responsibility for their behavior and their feelings. And I think that's where this boundary crossing goes. There's this sense that I'm responsible for their feelings, and now I'm a bad guy, and now I feel ashamed. And as we grow and get better boundaries ourselves, we'll get better. So let's look around some other examples here. Say like you have a 2-year-old. 2-year-olds are very fun, especially if you're a grandparent because there's more distance. But as a parent, it's really, really hard because they're going through this stage of separateness where before mom and dad, especially mom, was fused with me and felt my feelings. And as I begin to separate and want to do things separate, but it kind of scares me. So then I want to come back, oh, mommy, cling, cling, cling. And then it's like, hey, I want to run down the street. No, you can't do that. And we start to have to set limits. Limits support boundaries. It keeps us safe. It's saying, you don't say this to a 2-year-old, but you're 2 years old. You may get to pick what you want to wear, but you're going to wear something. You don't get to choose everything. And with that saying no, they feel very angry about the relationship because prior to that, they got whatever they wanted. Well, they were a 0 to 1-year-old where you pick them up, you hold them, you comfort them, you change their diaper and feed them. There's not many complex needs there. Important needs, but you never really can say no to someone 1 and under, okay? Because it's just how development works. With 2-year-olds, we need to say no. If we're fused, they try to make us feel responsible for their feelings. And if we have good boundaries and we see that, okay, what they're going through is a grieving process, but I'm not responsible for their behaviors. In fact, I'm responsible to them, but not for them. So if they're going to kick and scream and try to enroll the universe at a grocery store to feel bad for them, and if I buy into that and feel responsible for their behavior, it begins to not work as well as, okay, when you're done with that, sometimes you got to go and you don't have time for that. But sometimes I believe in kind of taking them outside to respect the boundary space of everybody else. So they can do that out in front of the store or beside the store. A dark alley. No, I'm joking. That's totally. Sometimes we just feel like, oh, it's so terrible. But it's really not. It's really, really important for them to do this now. Because if they don't do it now, they're going to do it when they're a teen. And it's sorting out, where do I begin and you end, or where do I end and you begin. And the more, I think Teflon, like, or non-stick coating. Yeah, I'm not going to let this stick. This is more about you than about me, unless I've been genuinely offensive. If I'm really, and I'm not a perfect parent for sure, so I've lost my temper, gotten mad, said mean things. I need to apologize for that. But if I feel like for once I did something pretty balanced, I'm not going to feel responsible for their behavior. That will help them fully feel responsible for their behavior, and that pain and suffering might motivate them to change and grow. You can see how this ties in with addiction recovery. Is because an addict will try to make you feel responsible for their behavior. And the disease of addiction is really, really good at it, to make you feel responsible for Tommy so that Tommy is still 30 years old, smoking marijuana. And, well, mom and dad, you didn't love me enough, or you weren't tough enough, and what they say may be true. But regardless of that, if we have good boundary space, we let go. It's as if they stick their hand in a fire and they want us to feel their pain. In this case, they want us to feel like the bad guy or the shame of what they're doing. If we use the phrase DETACH, detach, don't even think about changing him or her. Yeah. So if we detach and love, and we don't feel responsible for their behavior, that pain of their hand in the fire can motivate them to actually start to get better. This is why this codependency recovery is so important, because if we don't even know what we don't even know, it's like a builder can go into the house and see, oh, look, the sheetrock is not really done well and the taping's poor. Or a painter can go in and say, wow, those lines aren't cut into well. Or a mechanic can listen to a car and go, wow, this car is kind of borderline. A great chef may identify what food combinations might work better. Or a therapist can kind of see these things, but this is what we specialize in. A gardener might see quicker ways to design, a landscaping situation. So when it comes to human relationships, where do we go to get training? From our parents. We can't help it. So that's how and it's not to blame them for our behavior today, but to understand that that's where we learn these things. So if a family did not really have good boundaries in terms of feeling responsible for each other's feelings, we walk on eggshells. If we just comment on what we see and they get upset and they react and we feel guilty, this is what sets these things up. If parents feel too responsible for their kids' behavior, that sets us up too, because then we feel like not only am I owning my behavior, but I'm owning the behavior of my parents who are going to overreact to, So I like to always end with a solution, because we could talk probably 4 or 5 videos on this to really get it. It takes a while. What is the solution? The solution, I like things simple, but the solution is to see, first of all, any human relationship, we're not perfect. We're all doing the best we know to do. We're also always have opportunity to look at, well, what did I do wrong? What could I have done better? Is there something that I need to apologize for? And then we just simply apologize for it. If we truly can't see it, we might pray and ask God to reveal to us what we did wrong. If I go and talk to a bunch of people about it, there could be value to some people, but it could be triangling and gossip. So we try to avoid that a bit. But having a few people in our life to bounce things off of could be really useful, to say, is it me? Maybe I did something wrong. Does this sound offensive? And I understand it's just, we'll say, Steve's opinion of it. And Steve, who's a good friend, that says faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy, he might go, yeah, you do come on very strong with your opinions. And maybe you just pressured him into the car situation without knowing it. And so that could be good feedback for me, in which case I could apologize. When I apologize, I'm only really dealing with my side of the street. I don't have to go over there and give him feedback and advice on ways to do that. These things are often sticky. Sometimes it's really good to just take a break, just to get out of this state or fight or flight and reactivity, and to pray. Sometimes a lot of things aren't that urgent. Not that I believe in delaying, but if we're reacting, it usually makes things worse, especially when we feel like they've accused us of a bunch of stuff we didn't do, especially if they are suggesting, well, you tried to do this and you tried to do that. That's where getting into a state where I try to look at things from a different point of view, to step out of the situation. I have a video on switching perceptual positions, where there's Mark's point of view, Erik's point of view, well, we'll say Mark's point of view and Erik's point of view. And then there's this meta position where I am looking at things hopefully from a more objective point of view. That's often really useful. Another useful tool is to do expressive writing. Just write about this. Just write and write and write and write until you run out of steam. Just write it down. And that gets one layer off so that then new information can come up. And some of it is kind of what I consider detox, kind of like I'm so upset. And I might express it right. Well, why should I feel ashamed of this? This is their problem, blah, blah, blah. But I often just go, well, everybody has their problems. And another metaphor for this is like a fortress that needs to have walls around it to maintain protection. Often we don't feel protected in this. Yeah, that we feel responsible. I'll do another video on this topic, but it's going to be specifically about double binds, and we'll talk about that. A double bind, in short, is like when a father who might be inebriated, we could say drunk, and he buys his kid a bicycle, and then the next morning or a few days later, he sees this kid riding a bicycle and say, "What are you doing? Where did you get that bike?" And it's like, "Dad, you bought it." And it's like, "No, I didn't." And so then this argument. And it's dad saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I was drunk. I forgot. I blacked out." It's all the kid's fault. And this kid is made to feel like he had a part in it and it's his fault. And he should have stopped him from buying it, or even accused worse that he stole it. So that's happens a lot. Another place you'll see it, and I'm not trying to blame people, but you'll see it in politics. You just see it there. And not that I would want to watch a lot of it because it makes me not feel well. But, and actually, I'll say the parts that want to watch it, it's because we like to blame them. Maybe I'm guessing that we want to see how dysfunctional they are to make us feel better. And again, that's kind of a boundary issue. Like it affects us, but do I really need to watch them fling mud at each other and not take responsibility for their own mistakes? And that's where it's being modeled to us. If we could just take personal responsibility to respond, it feels pretty good actually, because it humbles us. And at the end of the day, I'm just a human being making mistakes every day. And if there's anything good, then I can give the glory to God for that, truly. I don't have to be more than I am. So, okay. Hopefully this is helpful to you. If so, leave comments. If not, let me know that as well. And you take care and have a great day.